the net profit margin, and the asset turnover, and the financial leverage ratio. Okay, if you multiply these three measures, you can finally get the return on equity. So net income over common equity is the return on equity ratio. So DuPont analysis is to break down the components of return on equity into three parts. The first, net profit margin, and the second one is the asset turnover, and the last part is the financial leverage. Okay, why do we do this? By doing this, you can find out the components that makes a firm's ROE high or low. Suppose a firm has a high ROE ratio. Okay, high. Why the firm has higher ROE ratio? So we are analyzing deeper to find out the determinants of a firm's profitability or efficiency. Okay, so suppose a firm has high ROE, which we can say that a firm has good profitability and efficiency. But suppose when we break down these ROE components using this DuPont analysis and found that the high ROE has been driven by its financial leverage. Okay, they can have a lower profit margin and lower asset turnover, but they have a huge financial leverage. In this case, you can get a high ROE ratio. So in this case, you can say the firm has some risk in the future in this case because they have financial leverage, higher financial leverage. Alright, anyway, financial leverage is the leverage effect using a debt capital. And we will talk about this soon in the latter part. Okay, so this is the risk analysis. A risk analysis examine the uncertainty of income flows for the total firm and for the individual sources of capital, which is debt, preferred stock, and common stock. And there are two types of risk. First is the business risk, and the second one is the financial risk. So simply speaking, the business risk is the risk that the firm's earnings will fluctuate due to several reasons such as macroeconomic conditions or the industry cycles. So it's the risk that earnings will be volatile, or risk that earnings will change. And financial risk is simply the risk that the firm does not meet its debt obligations. If they cannot pay off the debt, then the firm will go default and go for a liquidation process. So in this case, if the firm gets default, your equity value will converge to almost zero. So financial risk comes from using debt. So recall that financial leverage is driven by a debt capital. Leverage comes from a debt. So if you use more debt, there is more leverage. So you can increase your profitability, but at the same time, your probability of default will get higher. So there is more risk. Okay. So this is kind of a financial risk. Okay, business risk is the variability volatility of the firm's operating income over time. So it can be measured by the standard deviation of the earnings series, historical earnings, such as a net income or a operating profit or earnings before interest and taxes, or EBITDA, EBITDA, or the earnings before interest, taxes, and depreciation and amortization. And in general, two factors contribute to the variability of operating earnings. One is the sales volatility, and two is the operating leverage. Of course, this sales volatility comes from a industry characteristic. But this operating leverage is a firm specific characteristics. Okay, sales volatilities. Suppose some industries are cyclical, say IT industry are cyclical and utility are non-cyclical, or defense industry, defensive stock, cyclical or defensive. Okay, for instance, the earnings of IT firms are more volatile than utility firms by nature. Okay, so this is because IT firms are affected by economic conditions, but utility firms are relatively stable because we have to use electricity regardless of economic conditions. So cyclical stocks have more sales or earnings volatility, so we can say that the cyclical stocks have more business risk. And operating leverage comes from the use of fixed operating costs as opposed to variable operating cost. If you sell a product or service, this will incur a cost, either a fixed cost or a variable cost. So fixed cost is like a cost from a factory because it incurs a fixed amount of cost every month regardless of your sales amount. Okay, even though you sales nothing, you will have to pay for the fixed cost of a factory. But the variable cost, it depends on the amount of sales in product or service. So if you have increase in sales, you will have a variable cost. So the firm with relatively higher fixed operating costs will experience more variable operating income if sales exchange. So this is the simple example, and suppose a firm A sells product that has 100% variable cost, while firm B sells product that has 100% fixed cost. Okay, at the normal economic situation, they both make $100 of sales. They get the same amount of gross profit, gross earnings. But if the company, if the economy gets boom situation, so the sales growth will increase by 50%. What happens to the gross profit? Firm B, which has more fixed cost, has more growth in profit, right? So firm B has more increase in profit because the costs are fixed. Okay, this variable cost increase by 50%, but the firm B has fixed costs, so this